Previously on space exploration.
Wow.
Alright, welcome back to part 2 of the Trial of Will that is the space exploration mod. If you haven't watched the first part, you might want to go do that. Anyway, this time we're going to spend the next 100 hours building a space base a little more substantial than a bunch of spaghetti on a rock. First, I've got some errands to run, like setting up the wall defense supply train to work with the new base, and setting up some real pyroflux production, since we've blown through all the stuff we stockpiled from the core miner earlier. Without pyroflux, we're not making any glass, but fortunately the sand we need is right there. And since our vulcanite is shipped via rocket, we can just put a landing pad anywhere. But after that, it's all about space. You may have noticed the way I've been steering all of my belts to this area up here, and that's because to build anything in space, we first need to get supplies to space, and that's where these rockets come in. I'm going to use 3 of them. One to handle all the science packs, one to handle all the bulk resources like iron, copper, and steel, and one to handle everything else using logistics bots. Just like our first crappy little base, we're going to receive a signal from space and only have the inserters insert when we're below a certain level of that item. We've got the receiver down here, but to make it actually work, we need the transmitter in space. It's a bit cramped up here, but while we were off conquering that ingot planet, we've been slowly accumulating space scaffolding this whole time. With this, we can start expanding away from our little rock here. This stuff sucks though. It's even slower to walk on than drifting across empty space. Regardless, it gives us a nice place to set down the landing pad that'll be the center of our new base. I'm not going to bother explaining how this thing works again, but this plus the requester warehouse down on Nauvis will let us automatically bring anything from Nauvis into space simply by adding its signal to the constant combinators. This is extremely useful because most of the special space buildings take something weird like pumps or laser turrets, and being able to build a proper space mall will save you literal hours of scrounging around to bring all the special bits and bobs into space. Here we just have everything off the pad getting thrown into active provider chests, which then get neatly sorted in storage chests. Fluids are a little more complicated, but for now I'm just going to be launching up thousands of barrels from Nauvis for stuff like lube and petroleum until I can find a better solution. But we've got all the supplies we need, and automating a new building is as simple as expanding the mall. And believe me, there are a lot of special buildings. Now, before we can start making science in space, the new base is missing something rather important. We don't make any rough data substrate here. They are required for every space science. Maybe it was a little overkill to copy and paste our entire glass build down here, but whatever. Now that we've got glass, all we need is iron, and conveniently there's an iron bus right above us. It's almost like I did that on purpose or something. I have no idea how many of these things I'll need, but seeing as they're used in every science from now on and there's still like 20 to go, I'm gonna go with a lot. Unfortunately, making these also makes scrap. To get them into space, I'm just gonna build a rocket right here. Groundside, these rough substrates aren't used for anything. Also here I can siphon off some of the rocket fuel from the nearby sulfur rocket. We still need to get rid of the scrap though. And in case you've forgotten, this is still very much a put anything where it fits kind of base. From scrap, there's a chance to reclaim some iron, copper, or stone. And to deal with that, we'll just put it on trains and treat it like any other mine. Alright, back to space. We're gonna need some more cosmic water, so I brought a bunch of ice water from the nearby asteroid. And the bots handle bringing over barrels of lubricant. With the cosmic water, we can start polishing the rough data substrate. We've done this before, but not seriously. So I started off with a great idea that I'd put everything off of the main resource rocket onto belts. But I have decided to completely abandon that idea. The space belts are really bad. The undergrounds are too short, you need tons of different items but in small quantities, there's tons of junk byproducts, and you can only build on scaffolding, so planning your design takes a lot of forethought. My advice? Logistics bots all the way. You would need to be some kind of masochist to design your space base around belts. And I'm definitely not one of those, so I will be using robots. Polishing the substrate makes our water all dirty, so we need to clean it before cycling it back in. Cleaning it also makes a small amount of this contaminated bio-sludge. I'm gonna clean that as well, but I don't really have a use for bio-sludge, so I'm just gonna store it all in barrels. Once we polish the substrate, we can turn them into data cards using copper and advanced circuits. Yeah, it's a little overkill to give those resources their own rockets and landing pads, but whatever. If you're bad at circuits, just giving every resource its own dedicated rocket and landing pad is a perfectly legit way to play space exploration. But there's our data cards. Again. And here's some more chemical gel and thermofluid. The chemical gel takes up a lot of petroleum. We'll be launching petroleum barrels by the thousands. Thankfully, the thermofluid is rarely actually used up. We only lose about 2% of it every time we need to cool it down in these radiators. And with the thermofluid, we can set up some supercomputers. Then it's the machine learning data again. All we're really doing is remaking production and utility science from that asteroid, except it works this time. These cards are used in every science, which ordinarily would require a massive dedicated factory, but fortunately, whenever data cards are used up, they come out as junk data cards that we can then reformat and reclaim. Right now we can only reclaim junk data cards 70% of the time, but with more research we'll be able to get that number as high as 95%. The other 30% comes out as broken data cards that have no use but to be turned into scrap. Fluid management is a major part of space science. Lots of stuff takes cold thermofluid, but then you need to be able to pump back the hot stuff, so it's important to keep your fluid lines accessible. I've got another dedicated landing pad for stone, which we can combine with chemical gel to make this plasma stream. Back on the asteroid, one plasma generator wasn't even close to enough to support science production, and that was only for one kind of science, so I'm making more of them this time. And the basic space science again. Don't worry, we'll get to the new stuff soon. And here's the landing pad that'll get all of our ground science into space. Plus the landing pads for cryonite, vulcanite, and iron ingots. Because these output junk data cards as well as science, we need to use the filter inserters. I'm just gonna route all of this science into a warehouse and make the inserters stop adding more when there's over 2,000. And there it is, all of the sciences we already had, but better this time. It already looks like a giant mess. Let's make it even worse. Since we've been landing quite a few rockets up here, we've been accumulating a lot of rocket parts. This is just a simple rocket that sends it back to Navis. Fortunately, flying down from orbit takes about 1/10 as much fuel as it does to get up here. Now we've actually started to accumulate some scrap, so now we gotta deal with it. Same as down on Navis, it gives us stone, copper, and iron. We can't use furnaces in space, but we do have these special thermodynamics facilities. They're basically the same. Handling scrap in space is actually pretty convenient, because every copper and iron plate you reclaim is one you didn't need to launch into space. And here we are. Now it's time for the real meat and potatoes of this mod. Everything we've been doing for the past 100-something hours has just been the groundwork for making the 50 billion different space sciences, and that starts with researching these catalogs. To make a catalog, we'll need to turn our blank data cards into 4 different data cards and combine them in a supercomputer. This is where it gets a little complicated. We'll start out with Astronomic Science, and that starts out with cold thermofluid. No longer is it enough to just radiate off heat, now we need to put it through these supercoolers. Basically, it just takes 40 cool thermofluid and turns half of it cold and half of it hot. We'll need the fluid to cool down these telescopes that take these blank observation frames and turn them into, I don't know, observed frames. The blank frames are simple enough to make when you're using bots for everything. Space manufacturers have a whopping crafting speed of 10, so just one of these without modules is enough to make 10 frames a second, which is good because we need a lot. This design is a little, pointlessly complicated. But we turn them on and the telescopes start observing. It takes me literal hours to realize that one telescope doesn't have a recipe set. But now we make data cards. All we gotta do is combine these observation frames with blank data cards in this astronomics facility, and then get out actual data. Or a junk data card, or some scrap. Yeah, there's a chance to fail making a data card. Because we're using robots, actually making the cards is as easy as requesting blank cards in a requester chest and putting the trash in a provider chest to be taken to the scrap yard. That's 3 out of 4 cards done, but conveniently making the 4th card just requires combining all 3. With all 4, we can combine them to make the astronomic catalog. This also takes cold thermofluid. But just because we can make the catalog doesn't mean we can make the science. We need something else called astronomic insight, which we can get from putting the catalog into another supercomputer. We get 2 pieces of insight for every catalog, which isn't great. You know why? Just because we have the catalog and the insight doesn't mean we can make science either. We need something else, called significant data. It takes 36 insight to make 4, that is 9 catalogs each. You wanna know how much science we get for each piece of significant data? 2. But just because we have the catalog, the insight, and the significant data doesn't mean we can make the science. We need beryllium plate. There was a little bit that was left for us on that spaceship, but that's all we have. It's 20 plates each, so I've only got enough to make like 60. Also, apart from the labs, there's no productivity modules in space. This is because of all the byproducts like junk data cards and hot thermofluid, because if we had productivity modules, we'd actually gain thermofluid by using it. So what that amounts to is, this is all we get. Unfortunately, there is absolutely nothing useful we can get with just 60 astroscience, so we will do nothing with it. I'm also not going to turn all of the plates into science, because I'll need some later. But basically, we're at an impasse. We can't do any more research until we have some new resources, so... Just like we needed crinite and vulcanite to make production and utility science, we're gonna need beryllium to make astroscience, and it shouldn't surprise you that we can't find it on Nauvis. We're gonna need to go to another planet to get it. And here we are on another planet. Welcome to Verbti. Guess who forgot to unpause OBS? Whatever, all I did was set up some oil refining by copying the base on Nauvis. This planet has no crude oil, but it's got a good amount of coal, so I can make do with coal liquefaction. And here, my associate has copy-pasted the reactor design from our crinite planet. The sun rises like once a week on this planet, so nuclear power is required. Again, that transmitter and receiver chest will make sure that Nauvis keeps this place stacked up with all the uranium it needs. We'll need this oil production not only for the rocket fuel required to leave this planet, but also a bunch of plastic. You may have also noticed that this isn't a beryllium planet. It's a holmium planet. Holmium is to energy science what beryllium is to astroscience, and even though I don't have any energy science set up yet, I looked at the research and decided I'd much rather have energy science first. But now our oil production is all set up, and all we're missing is some heavy oil to kick off the process. Excellent. It's only enough to start up 4 of them at first, but pretty soon we've got them all running. You know, the best part about doing all this stuff after you've already built a huge base is you can just launch rockets like it's nothing. I've sent a rocket for a single stack of efficiency modules once. Another thing we'll need is sulfuric acid, but not much. There's not much iron on this planet either, but more than enough than we'll need to take care of sulfuric acid. This is the only thing we'll actually need iron for. It's kind of funny that just for sulfuric acid I need to make this massively long railroad. Now to actually mine some holmium. Holmanite has a mining time of 300%, so I'm using speed modules. These patches have like 30 million ore in them, so I am not crying over the lost productivity. Now, this railway is super long, and raw holmium only stacks to 20, which then takes 2 to make 1 crush. So if you just move it as is, it would be extremely inefficient, but if we just crush it at the mine, we can fit as much as 5 trains of the raw stuff, since it stacks to 20. The one downside of this process is that it makes stone as a byproduct, but we're just gonna turn that into landfill, shove it in a box, and forget about it. Honestly, when I'm all done with this series, I might make a retrospective video on the whole mod, so I'll save most of my thoughts until then, but let me just say, I'm not really a big fan of every single one of these recipe chains giving you random stone as a byproduct. Also, I forgot to set the filters. There we go. So, what's next in our quest for holmium? Well, this one. Holmium chloride. It's a bit... yeah. First off, what the heck are anion-ion exchange beads? Well, these. You can see why I needed the sulfuric acid and the plastic. We'll just ship in the crinite straight here. I want to make the finished holmium ingots entirely on this planet. I'm missing plastic, but the coal is right here. As usual, I can just copy and paste our build from Nauvis. In this mod, it pays to put the effort in to make a few good designs up front, since you'll be essentially starting from scratch on these new planets. I figured I'd show you this deadlock, just in case you started thinking I was too smart. Also, we'll need this copper later, but that's all the preliminary stuff out of the way. First things first, we're going to need the exchange beads. And that means a place to drop off our plastic and sulfuric acid. And here's a nice landing pad for that cryonite. Here's something I didn't know last time. I used to think you needed to target each planet individually, but apparently there's an option to launch to any empty pad with that name and have it automatically land anywhere in the universe. Pretty convenient. This is what happens when you forget to use filter inserters. All of the reclaimable cargo sections have been placed lovingly on the belt. While I've been doing that, my associate has been setting up another holmium mine. Even if they're not that great at the game, once you build it, it's pretty easy for someone else to copy it. I want to sustain about 4 belts of crush, and at 300% mining speed, 1 mine isn't enough. So this holmium chloride is a little bonkers. It has a 50% chance to just output the ingredients, occasionally spits out sand, and only gives you what you want about a quarter of the time. This means to make sure the thing doesn't deadlock, we need to route the output back into the input. You might recall our vulcanite design, and we're gonna solve it in much the same way. Filter splitters and priority input splitters. Actually getting both belts to take priority input from the output without looking like trash took some finagling, but eventually I get it. It's a bit of a mess. I made this to handle 1 full belt of crush, so we're gonna need 4 of them. Also, for some reason the bass is super fat on this one recording. I guess it was because of my audio router, and it only fixed when I reset my computer, but who knows, I'm a computer engineer, not an audio engineer. The next step is holmium powder, but it is so simple compared to the chloride. It takes just a little bit of copper wire. And this is why we needed that copper mine earlier. The centrifuges take 5 pieces of chloride a second, which takes about 20 chemical plants to produce, so this is a little overbuilt, but it looks good and math is for chumps. But finally it's ready to plug in the holmium crush. No matter how much you play Factorio, watching a factory first roar to life never gets old. I'm not getting rid of the sand yet, and that's because I have a use for it. We'll just take a quick look at Taurus and copy this. That's because we're going to be making molten holmium next, and molten holmium requires pyroflux, and pyroflux requires sand. I actually made a train stop and a crusher expecting to bring in outside stone, but as it turns out, the holmium process makes more than enough sand. Which I did not expect, because we also need the sand to make the ingots. Unlike the copper and iron ingots, which took like 6, according to my calculations, we'll only need about 1 casting machine for every furnace. So I make this rather compact design. The vulcanite lands right next to the cryonite, and pretty soon we have everything we need. And that's holmium. And it only took us about 8 hours. Just for reference, I've beaten unmodded Factorio in about 4 hours. With some rocket fuel, we're almost ready to ship some out of here. We put down the rocket silo and get out the blueprint for my automatic rocket part requester. I'm gonna say it again, but it just pays off to make this stuff right the first time. And it's very satisfying when you get this stuff down to a science. My compatriot decided to set up core mining, which honestly probably would have saved me the effort of building those iron and copper mines since you need so little of it, but it gives a lot of holmanite as well. With everything else done, that only leaves one last thing, covering it all in concrete. I'm sorry, but if your base doesn't have lamps and concrete, it's not a real base, it's just a starter base. After all that effort, here's some meteor defense to make sure space doesn't hurl any rocks at my beautiful base. Okay, the real last thing we need to do is set up the cargo supply rocket. We set it to V for Verbti. Splendid. Returning to orbit with as much holmium as we could ever want, we can now make the first tier of energy science. Energy science is just like the Astronomic Science, taking 4 data cards to make a catalog, catalogs to make insight, and insight to make significant data. Then all 3 make the science. I know what buildings I need to make all 4 data cards, so I just place them and the bots drag them out of the mall. First thing we need is some ion stream, which takes our plasma stream plus a copper plate. That will make our electromagnetic field data. Space pipes are super short, so routing the thermofluid is quite a challenge. Polarization data takes multispectral mirrors, which is no problem since we've been making those in the mall since forever for the flat solar panels, but what's more annoying is instead of outputting hot thermofluid like everything else, it outputs cool thermofluid. In the advanced sciences, pretty much nothing takes just cool fluid anymore, so I need to make this hypercooler just to get rid of it. Since everything in space outputs junk and there's like 80 different kinds of data cards, just setting up the filters for these inserters takes a significant amount of time. Also, we're only using one facility for every data card, but don't worry about it. You're practically a megabase if you need more than one. Since you can't use productivity modules in space, there is literally nothing stopping you from pumping these full of speed modules. And in a mod with tier 9 speed modules, you can get them to be pretty fast. Back on Verbti, our rocket is already almost half full, and since each one of these ingots is worth 10 plates, that's a lot. We still gotta turn them into plates, but I'll just let the bots handle that. Like they're already handling everything. At the start I had dreams of making this a nice organized base, but I have given up. So this conductivity data gives off something called contaminated scrap. Just one kind of scrap isn't good enough. I'm just gonna shove it in storage and forget about it while I set up radiation data. All this one takes is some enriched uranium, with the small quirk that it spits it back out 50% of the time, so we just gotta make a way to shove it back in. Also, these particle accelerators are hilarious. I only just now realized they have a power consumption of 103 megawatts. If you filled it with speed modules, it would consume an entire 2x2 nuclear reactor's worth of power. And that is why we will be giving them efficiency modules from now on. There's all 4 data cards, and that means it's catalog time. And the insight. These catalogs and insights are only for energy science, but we can actually use the significant data we're making from the astronomic science as well. Just those 50 pieces of significant data represent letting the thing run for about an hour. But that's enough to make us over 100 energy science packs. Now I just turned the science warehouse into a requester and had a request for, I don't know, 2,000. The only thing we can really get right now is holmium cable, but it's what's after that that I'm interested in. Space Railway. Now I can train, but in space. I also get these special space trains. Full disclosure, the space trains are actually a separate mod, but I thought they were cool. So, significant data is really annoying, but fortunately there is research to help. Using the little bit of astroscience I was able to scrounge together, I can research this. Astroparticle simulation still takes 36 insight total, but by combining energy and astro insight, we actually get 50% more significant data. It's also the first thing that takes supercooled thermofluid. With all the thermofluid we're using, we're not cooling it down fast enough, so I add more radiators. God, what a mess. I swear it's just my second starter space base. Also, I can research these flat solar panel 2s, which are twice as good as their predecessor. Instead of using regular burnable fuel, the space trains require these power packs that can only be charged in these. Instead of consuming the fuel, the space trains just output used packs that need to be charged again. You've heard of trains, yes, but have you heard of space trains? The biggest advantage of space rail is that it doesn't need to be placed on scaffolding. They're pretty fast, about 60% faster than land trains. Using the last of my astronomic science, I try and get pylons. Thanks to the productivity bonus of the labs, I barely have enough. Although to actually make the pylons, we also need beryllium. But I still have 180 left over, and that's enough to get me 28 total. Now, the pylons and the space rails, all of it has been me gearing up to actually get beryllium. Beryllium is extremely abundant in asteroid belts, so we're headed back to Calidus 1. You might remember it from where we found that broken spaceship so many days ago. What we're looking for is a nice big asteroid to put our base on so we can save on scaffolding. And this one fits the bill. It's also very close to the 2 massive mines of beryllium. Firstly, we need to get some electricity. We're a little further from the sun than Now Vis, but these stronger solar panels are more than enough. The main reason I wanted these pylons is because you can actually place them on empty space, plus their wire reach is double that of a big electric pole. which makes them the perfect companion for these space rails. I've still only got 28, but with how long they are, that's more than enough. The first thing I'm going to be getting is some more water ice. There's a little patch of it on this asteroid here. One big disadvantage of space rail is that suddenly all of your fancy rail blueprints don't work anymore. You gotta make all of your junctions again from scratch. With 141 million barrel ore in that mine, I don't think we need to worry about depleting it any time this century. Beryl has a mining time of 400%. It's a good thing these big mining jewels have 5 module slots. With a mine up, all we need is a place to bring the ore. Having a waiting bay before your big drop-offs is just good practice. I was wondering why my game was lagging, but as it turns out, the two idiots have found a way to lag it by repeatedly trying to place space scaffolding on an asteroid. This is why I don't pay them. Regardless, they've set up a mine for methane ice, which has about no use right now, but maybe later. Whatever you're thinking, don't say it. This'll turn water ice back into water. And here's all the battery chargers for the train. We also need an extra inserter to bring out the discharge power pack and take it to the chargers. As usual, I'm planning for 4 belts of input. The first step is beryllium sulfate, which creates water and more sand. We're not allowed to use chemical plants in space, but these biochemical facilities can do everything they can do, but 4 times faster. And they'd better, considering they're 9 times the size. Well, first time getting run over by a space train. Fortunately, the Factorio engineer is powerful enough to survive the vacuum of space long enough to get my gear back. We're missing the sulfuric acid, but I'll deal with that later. Next up is beryllium hydroxide, which takes a kyanite rod and some water. It is also a liquid. It's pretty easy, and so is beryllium powder. All it takes is the liquid. Just this is all it'll take to turn 180 items per second of raw beryl into powder. Also, one of the helpers set up a delivery cannon for sulfuric acid for me. Not like we can make it in space, since there's no oil or coal up here. With that rocket and Hoth here set up to any pad with the same name, the moment we rename this pad, a delivery arrives. For the final step, we'll also need vulcanite. Just like the holmanite, we want to make liquid beryllium, and that requires pyroflux. We can use the sand output from the sulfate, which is pretty much the only time I'm thankful for the sand byproduct because there's no stone up here. If you'll recall, we can't use industrial furnaces in space, so we'll need to use these thermodynamics facilities. And just look how big they are in comparison. Everything is huge in space. Tragically, this means I can't just copy and paste my design from Hoth here, even though it's the exact same process. At least for the casting machines, I can copy the steel ingot design from Taurus. Still need to replace the belts and pipes, though. They can also use the leftover sand. Everything's set up except for turning it on, so it's time for the automatic cargo requester. Today's letter is C, for Calidus Asteroid Belt. While I'm here, I might as well set up a rocket for the methane ice as well. So I thought for a second I'd just turn the pyroflux into rocket fuel, but then I remembered it took coal, so much for that idea. Instead I'll just set up a rocket on Navis that carries rocket fuel. A full rocket of solid rocket fuel is enough to make 250,000 liquid rocket fuel, which is like 4 rockets, maybe 2 depending where you're going. It's not ideal, but considering 1 rocket full of beryllium ingots is enough to make 500,000 plates, I don't anticipate launching very many rockets from here. Also, whenever you're making a landing in an asteroid belt, a little bit of it always seems to explode. Now we turn it on. This is a good time as any to explain the problem with building something like this in space. There's still no productivity modules. That might not sound so bad until you realize that making beryllium ingots takes 4 steps, each of which accept productivity modules. Assuming chemical plants with tier 3 prod mods, that's 24 plus 24 plus 24, and 40% from the industrial furnace. That's right, from the same amount of raw beryl, we are making less than half the ingots we could be making on the ground. The fast buildings in space are nice, but they're not worth an extra 112%, and that's just with tier 3s. My advice is, if you can do it on the ground, do it on the ground. Compared to holmium ingots, which our build averages about 120 per minute, our beryllium ingots are not great. But who knows how many of these things I'll need. This might just be plenty. But still, we've got beryllium. We've already got Astro Science up, so all we gotta do is turn it into plates. And christen Calidus asteroid belt with its own supply rocket. Here I am standing all confident next to it, even though I forgot to set it to C and it's just reading Taurus's data. With Astro Science fully automated, we can start researching things like rocket survivability so they stop crashing all the time. Pretty soon I'm loading another rocket to go conquer yet another planet. After getting holmium and beryllium, there are still 2 more extraterrestrial materials we need to get. Actually, technically 3, but we don't talk about that one. Just like energy and astroscience, these resources have their own science paths. The next material on our radar is iridium. It's used in industrial science, which will give me access to some very fun toys. That's what brings us to this planet, Wayland. I've already scanned the whole thing before coming here. Unfortunately, unlike Verbti, it's got biters on it. Although, unlike Taurus, it's only 7% threat and not 100. The biter nests are small and far between, but still annoying. There is a way to make them less annoying, though, by killing every single biter on this planet, which even at 7% is a little easier said than done. After about 20 minutes, I gave up doing it manually. They shouldn't bother us too much while we're building, though. This planet has a pretty good supply of oil, which is good because we're going to be launching lots of rockets. On top of that, we'll also need sulfuric acid to actually mine the raw iridite. I start setting up the oil refinery and leave building the power plant, pump jacks, and train stops to my helpers. Honestly, if I were doing this whole thing solo, it would have taken me maybe an extra 10 or 15 hours to get to this point, but they are great for moral support. Some people were upset that I was doing this with help, but I assure you that 98% of the effort is me. Except that extra 2% is the most soul-crushing work, so being able to offload that means I can play longer and get these videos out faster. This whole build is a little overkill since mining iridite only takes 0.1 sulfuric acid each, but We're almost ready, but we'll need some iron plates for the sulfuric acid. We won't need much, but if you're going through the effort of building a mine, you might as well just cover the whole patch. We'll also need a tiny bit of this for the fuel cells to our nuclear power plant. So that'll go fetch some iron. I randomly check up on the asteroid belt and realize it's actually deadlocked because of too much water. I totally didn't realize that the whole process actually creates a little bit more water than it consumes. I'll need to deal with that later. There's enough barrel to keep us going, so I'm focusing on iridium. We won't actually need that much sulfuric acid, so most of our petroleum will probably be turned into fuel. Anyway, we've got oil flowing. Another convenient thing about keeping this place stocked with uranium is I can use it to make nuclear fuel for the trains. Unlike holmium and beryllium, I'm not going to process iridite entirely on this planet. The recipe requires a lot of plastic, and we don't have the coal we'd need at all on Wayland. I could just ship in plastic from Nauvis, but the recipe also requires 2 more ingredients that would need to come via rocket. One problem with this is that I'd be receiving so many rockets, the leftover parts would vastly exceed the amount I need to actually ship out the iridium. So we'd end up with like 2,000 cargo sections just laying around. Obviously I could deal with this with a little more effort, but since we've got more than enough rocket fuel on site and shipping in cargo sections is no problem, I'd rather just launch hundreds of rockets and finish it on Nauvis. Anyway, we're just gonna crush it here. Crushing iridite is a little interesting since it frequently spits out uncrushed iridite that we need to route back through for another grind. Honestly, it kind of makes sense, but that means yet another priority input splitter. Everything's set up, so now we just need to actually make the iridite mines. The mines are straightforward, it's just the same as mining uranium, except it has the biggest mining time yet, 500%. Can't forget the stop for the sulfuric acid. I ended up making 3 of these mines, since we'll need a good amount to maintain 4 belts of input. Now we make some trains and plug in the ore. You can see just how little ore just one of these trains can carry. But we're gonna get over 40% of it back, so we should be able to keep it saturated. Everything's all set up, so all that's left is to make the supply rocket. Except when I come back, it's all deadlocked. It's not making crush at all. I assume since we're getting 40% back, I should have been able to shove the stuff to be reprocessed back in halfway, but evidently not. It might be the productivity modules, but it's not clearing enough of the old erudite to be able to crush anymore. I reroute everything to priority input at the start, and that seems to work fine. That was a lot of effort just for the first step. Hopefully the other steps will be easier. So, if I'm trying to set up iridium processing, what am I doing down on Mariel? Well, it's because I need enriched vulcanite, so I gotta make a rocket just for that. It does make my beautiful vulcanite build a little uglier, but it's not that bad. Hopefully it won't slow down my vulcanite block production too much. So this whole time beryllium production has still been messed up on account of a water overflow, but that ends now. My associate is setting up a system that'll take the excess, turn it into steam, and just burn it off as power. It sucks needing to do something like this because these tiny electrical networks actually have a fairly significant UPS cost, but we're lazy and it works. This is a nice unused corner of my base. Time to make iridium. First thing we'll need on Nauvis are these cation-ion exchange beads. They're the exact same as the anion-ion exchange beads, except they take vulcanite instead. That means we can just copy our entire build off of Verbti and call it a day. Except I'm also going to build some anion here as well, since I'll probably need them later. Next, we need to make iridium powder, and this recipe might look a little familiar. Once again, we can just copy the entire build off of Verbti. All we really gotta do is change the filters, it is the exact same. I got a little excited and turned it on, only to realize I forgot to put in the water. Now for the iridium blast cakes, but this is easy, we just gotta bring in that enriched vulcanite. Although, as similar as it's been, we will need more centrifuges than the holonium build. I really like how the mod maker made these things glow according to the recipe. Alright, it's ingot time. Since we're on Nauvis, we can just bring in the pyroflux on a train. It also gives out steam as a byproduct, but I can just turn that into water and feed it back into the chem plants. And there's our iridium ingots. No casting machines necessary. The rocket will go right here. Let's watch the whole process. There they are, all ready to be blasted off. With iridium in hand, we can finally open the door to materials science. All of the science paths have their own quirks, and materials science really likes to give you scrap and contaminated stuff. Also, pretty much every data card takes these material testing packs. With how much they're used, you'd be tempted to make them on Nauvis for the productivity, but they only stack to 10, so transporting them into space is a real pain. By now you probably know how all this works, so I'm not going to bother explaining every single data card. If you're really interested, you should be able to pause. Both these facilities spit out contaminated cosmic water, but so little of it I'd be able to make 10,000 science before it ever fills up. Basically what I'm saying is, recycling isn't worth my time, so I'm just gonna not. I had high hopes for this second space base, but I have long since given up. But who cares, we've got material science catalogs now. And the insight. Moving these fluids around is starting to get a little tough. Luckily, since I've been away for 10 hours, I've managed to accumulate quite a bit of significant data. Just like we could combine energy and astro insight, we can actually combine all three to make even more efficient significant data. We can also get plated scaffolding and better thruster suits. Finally, I'm not limited to this tiny grid if I want to be in space anymore. The plated scaffolding is great as well, because it makes us walk twice as fast as the crappy scaffolding. Really frickin' expensive to make, though. What I really want, though, is this. You've heard of delivery cannons, yes, but have you heard of weapons delivery cannons? Honestly, it's much less a delivery cannon and more just a cannon. With this, we can quite literally nuke things from orbit. And I can think of no better use than deleting all life from that one pesky planet. Well, the basic pile driver definitely kills nests, but it's more like anywhere artillery. Let's try out a nuclear warhead. Not bad. We should be able to clear out the entire planet from the comfort of our orbit. So that's exactly what I'll do. They also come with a manual targeting mode, so I can just sit back and relax as they rain death upon my enemies. This is what's best in life. Doing it manually is good too. I won't lie to you though, doing it like this is extremely expensive. This is what it takes to launch a single pile driver, and I checked, I launched about 1,300 of these. After letting it run for a few hours, it's cleared out most everything, but there's still a few camps of annoying stragglers left behind. All the nests are dead, but it still won't let me confirm extinction because there's still a few behemoth biters wandering around. After this, I just let it run for another hour, expecting it to be done when I got back, but still. There can't be that many of them left, and even behemoth biters can't take more than 2 of these to the face. So what gives? Well, eventually I saw it. The auto-targeting is very dumb. Basically, it's a complete crapshoot if the biter will walk out of the way before it lands, and the high HP regen of behemoths does not help. I guess that means you actually gotta use something that one-shots them. Except this one still survived. At least if they're all auto-firing here, it means it's the last one. Finally, it dies after my superior brain manually targets it. But the moment of truth? Finally. That was so much effort. The main advantage of this is that we can trim the surface and the biters won't respawn. With 3 out of 4 to go, there's only one resource left, and that brings us to this planet called Buttercup. Vitamelange only appears on lush green planets, and as far as I know, it's impossible to find it on any planet with 0% threat. The best part is, even if we did do a hostile extinction like we did on Wayland, there's these biter meteors that will randomly spawn a new nest anyway. If we put up enough meteor defense installations, we could prevent it, but after spending 4 hours clearing out Wayland, I don't think I'm up for another one. What I'm saying is, I actually need to bother building defenses this time. I don't need too much space though, so just this little box will do. Luckily this planet has tons of oil to make rocket fuel, and I'm just gonna copy the entire refinery off of Wayland. This is what late game Factorio is all about, except we're still only mid-game in space exploration. Now we actually gotta mine the raw Vitamelange. Unlike every other resource except for maybe water ice, it actually has a mining time of 100%. So from this one patch, we can get like 6 full blue belts. Now I'd love to make all the Vitamelange here and just ship out the final product like I do the holmium, but there's some problems. Chiefly amongst them is that it requires stone. Now the first step is crushing it, and while it does make some stone as well as wood, it's not enough. So I figured I'd make like our Iridite planet and just ship out the crushed stuff. It seems like a no-brainer seeing as raw Vitamelange only stacks to 20, whereas the crushed Vitamelange stacks to 50. If you'll recall the recipe, we actually get anywhere between 1.5 and 2.5 as many nuggets as we have raw Vitamelange. Averaging out to 2 times as much, this effectively means that just shipping raw is worth 40 nuggets in each slot. It's still short of 50, but when you factor in simple tier 3 productivity modules, suddenly one slot of 20 raw Vitamelange turns into 52.8 nuggets, meaning that it's actually more space efficient on average to ship the raw stuff than the crushed stuff, and that number only gets bigger with better productivity modules. Pretty funny. Now, since I don't want any biter meteors falling inside of my walls, I'm going a little overkill with my meteor defense. That other rocket is for Vitamelange core fragments. We'll need them later. But for now, our work here is done. Now that we're mostly done with the planets, it's time to address a pretty major problem that's been brewing over the last 50 hours we've been busy. We've almost completely depleted all of the stone inside of our walls. Unlike copper and iron, which are practically infinite thanks to Taurus, we still source all of our stone locally. No stone means no circuits or low-density structures, and that means no cargo rockets. This, however, is a perfect task for someone else. while I do more important things, like setting up Vitamelange. I put down a landing pad below our erudite processing, add some crushers, think about it, and then realize there is absolutely nothing worthwhile in biological science. Wow, 5% faster handcrafting and better medkits. So I decided it would be infinitely more worth my time to start working on the second tier of energy science. Just like the first tier, it's 4 data cards to make a catalog, except the data cards are a little more complicated this time. You have stuff like force field data that takes 2 data cards from the first catalog only for a 50% chance to make the actual card. Still, with bots, even stuff like this is relatively easy. The game's so much easier when you give up making everything look nice. Most cards are fine with having only 1 building, but with recipes like this that have very high failure rates, you'll generally want more than 1. The second tier is pretty much the same, except it takes the first tier, a broad catalog, and some holmium cables instead. That means they all take insight and significant data. Energy Science 2 probably unlocks the best stuff. Most especially the pylon substations and wide area beacons. I don't think you're fully prepared for just how good they are, but we gotta unlock them first. While I wait for some of that science to build up, this is the perfect time to give my associates some support from orbit. That'll teach him. With our combined efforts, the whole area is almost cleared. Even though these cannons can fire automatically, they're best used manually to thin out a nest before you clear it yourself. So you know how we can combine insight to make more efficient, significant data? Well, we can also combine catalogs to make more insight. Instead of only 2 for each insight, we're now getting 8 for both. Very useful. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Environmental storytelling. Anyway, this whole area is about ready to be captured. Here's the pylon substation. It's got the same wire length as the regular pylon, except it has a 64 by 64 power grid, which is quite a bit bigger than the substations we've been using up to this point. This one pylon is all it takes. So when it says wide area beacon, it really means wide area. I wanted to get the new walls and mines squared away before I actually used them, but behold. Not only is it massive, but it also holds twice as many modules. The only downside is that it takes 10 megawatts just by existing, but that's well worth it. Even though I have about 0 intention of setting up biological science anytime soon, I'm still gonna finish processing Vitamelange. 4 belts of raw Vitamelange as input means we need to deal with 8 belts of nuggets. We've also got to deal with the trash. Instead of just burning the wood, there is a recipe that lets you make green circuits using wood instead of stone, so I make some of that and throw it on the main bus. The stone byproduct will cover most of the sand we need for the next step, but we'll need some more. Here's a nice way to let both ingredients use stack inserters. We're gonna need a lot of these. Also, we're gonna need a good bit of water. This is a lot of belts. Next, we stuff it all into a furnace with some vulcanite. The process also gives out a small amount of methane gas, which I have absolutely no use for, so I'm just gonna stuff it in a tank and forget about it. But now let's actually turn this thing on. It's very green around here. There's one more step. While we do need spice for a few recipes, the vast majority of the Vitamelange needed is from extract. The furnaces occasionally spit some out, and to actually make the extract, we seed the process with a single extract to make even more. It's very similar to vulcanite enrichment. All we need to do is route both outputs back into itself and only let the excess extract out as usable product. Now it's all ready for when I decide to make bioscience in about 100 hours. Although the extract is an ingredient in making tier 4 productivity modules, so at least I have that. After capturing all 4 of the extraplanetary resources, this is the first time in like 50 hours I've had to think about what to do next. One thing I can think of is to fit some trains in here. If you're doing something like this, it's always better to place the tracks first and then build around them. On the heels of our recent stone shortage, I've decided to do something to help it out a little bit. There's actually a more efficient recipe to make processing units by using holmium cables to half the circuits required. Fitting the whole holmium cable build around here is a little awkward, but it's legitimately the only place I could put it and still be able to route it into the blue circuits. It's a bit of a squeeze, but it works. So this whole time I've been thinking about how I could improve my space base. Obviously I can't keep using that spaghetti abomination into the late game, just making Energy Science 2 was already pushing it to its limits. But playing around with these trains gave me an epiphany, and that starts with Material Science 2. But you've already seen me do this multiple times, 4 data cards, catalog, science, yada yada. Except this one is special because one of the cards takes a frickin' train and makes 1.5k scrap. Whatever, there's the science. This place is at critical mass of trash. Okay, random aside, I made a water ice rocket on Calidus asteroid belt. The next step to toning down our trash factor is getting all the funny new resources in one area. Each resource has a few of these advanced products like heavy girders and bearings, which are used primarily in science, but also for some very advanced buildings like the wide area beacons. And sorry if I'm being a little terse on all these stations and manufactories, but this video is already 50 minutes long and we've still got a lot of stuff to cover. But hey, here they are in a bus. There are some we're still missing, but I've planned around fitting them in, and we'll get them with later research. But now we need to deal with getting them into space, and turns out cargo rockets just aren't sexy anymore. Space elevators are the new hotness. With one of these babies, we can go to and from orbit whenever we want, and even send trains into space. Obviously, if it involves trains, I'm going to be struck with a compulsive need to structure my entire base around them. The mod maker should have known better. To actually make it work, you first need to fill it with over 1,000 of these special cables. Then there's a maintenance cost over time and whenever you send a train up. When I first put it down, I was rather surprised to see it about 1,000,000 miles away from my space base. Turns out it's locked to the exact coordinates of where you put it down. Well, I was planning on building a new base anyway. Now it's time to introduce my super awesome idea. Why have a bunch of small trains when you could just have one really big train? This one's 20 wagons long. Not only is it super long, but it's also going to carry every single item we could ever need into space. I should probably mention right now that this isn't exactly optimal, but it is cool. However, there's more than 20 things we'll need in space, and so some of these wagons will need to be mixed. It might sound prone to overflowing, but we'll use the exact same design we've been using to manage the cargo rockets to control how much these trains will pick up. We'll also add some special conditions so the train will automatically leave whenever something runs out. The first wagon will handle all the random supplies via logistics bots. Traversing through menus to set up combinators and filters probably took me at least 30 minutes. The left-hand constant combinators handle everything that comes in from the train on belts, and the right hand handles everything else. It's a good thing I set up this train that goes in between the new and old bases. Also, I just realized that because it's a double-headed train, I accidentally put all the filters up in reverse. Let this be a lesson, just in case you're in danger of thinking I was smart or something. Now that we've taken everything off of the train, let's put it all back onto another train. Or rather, trains plural. Why, yes, it would be more efficient to just bring each of these trains down to Nauvis instead of mixing it and unmixing it, but this is just how I decided to do it. The throughput of this build is pretty limited, but like I said, most of the space exploration recipes seem to use a lot of different items rather than a lot of one item. Here's where I'm gonna fit the new supply hub. I don't want to need to take a 1,000-mile train ride every time I want a new item. The best part about making a third base is now I get to re-experience making all the preliminary stuff like data cards for a third time. Hooray. Well, no use crying about it. Now we've got all the items we'll need in space, but we'll need some fluids as well. Space takes a surprising amount of light oil and petroleum gas, especially the petroleum. Since we have the elevator, we don't need to worry about shipping barrels anymore. We can just use fluid wagons. Though I had hoped to keep my space and ground rail networks mostly separate, but adding fluid wagons to the Megatrain felt like a step too far. Still, I don't like it. I might do something about it in the future. I think I'm gonna stick with this double-headed train stack design for the whole base. Again, nowhere near optimal, but kinda cool. Also, it's kind of convenient, which is great because I've got a video to get out. From there, we remake all the space fluids like cosmic water, chemical gel, thermofluid, and this new stuff, cryoslush. Then we load it all onto their own double-headed fluid wagons. This is what we made that water ice rocket for. Then it's just a matter of setting up train stops for all the supplies. If you're going to make a design like this, make sure you give your train stations a train limit of 1. You'll never guess what happened, though. Apparently, the train stops are too short, and the trains can't get far enough in to clear the incoming curved rail to get on the outgoing one. Even though they worked when I placed them at the train stop, they break when they go in themselves. That means I need to lengthen every single one of these train stops by 1 rail. Well, I lengthened enough of them for now. Now we bring in the fluids from Nauvis. I don't actually have the cryonite for the cryonite slush yet, so I gotta bring it in from a landing pad and put it on a train. I have no idea if this will be enough fluid for the base, but one way to find out. But thanks to the flexibility of my trains, even if I need more, it's just a matter of effort. While we're making fluid, we might as well make more fluid. Plasma streams and all its derivatives are used in some form for every science, and the buildings you make it in are absolutely enormous, so it's best we make it in a central location and put it on trains as well. To make it even more compact, I've put the train stops as close together as possible. I don't bother with buffer chests because these take so little I'm convinced a single train could leave and come back before the belt runs dry. Altogether, we only need to bring in 5 resources to make all the different streams. And remember, these particle accelerators use 10 megawatts each, so you better remember your efficiency modules. Whenever you're done building something, it's best to remove all the scaffolding you didn't need, especially the super expensive plated scaffolding. Here we put them on trains. I guess my one takeaway that I want you to get out of this run is that you can just do whatever you want with trains. Put down those city block blueprints you got off of Reddit and go crazy. Okay, that's done. What next? Well, I'd love to make blank data cards, but that creates a ton of contaminated cosmic water, so first I'll need to make a place that decontaminates cosmic water. I'll also make it decontaminate contaminated scrap. Now, there is a recipe to polish substrates without creating byproducts, but it's super wasteful compared to cosmic water, seeing as it consumes the much more expensive chemical gel instead of just contaminating it. Besides, since it doesn't make scrap, it actively deprives us of free resources. Anyway, this will ensure that our cosmic water is squeaky clean. Okay, now it's time for blank data cards. Nothing has changed in the last 2 times we've made them, except for how we're handling moving the resources. Since we've got the main train, I've mostly done away with the need for landing pads, but this is one of the few resources I'll still bring on via rocket. We'll also want a waiting bay, since we'll be sending these blank cards to at least 6 places by the time we're done with all the science. The data cards also make scrap, so now we'll need a place to deal with it. After seeing that one recipe in material science that created 1,500 scrap on its own, I'm reasonably confident that I need to build a pretty large scrapping area. The reclaimed materials all go on trains, and eventually I'll make a circuit condition that forces trains to pick up from here instead of the main base whenever there's a full load's worth, but I'll deal with that later. I promise we'll get to the real science eventually. Unfortunately, we need to make production and utility science again. That means we need machine learning data. It's pretty simple though, just need some thermofluid, all the other ingredients, and a way to take off scrap since it makes that as well. Machine learning data is also used in Tier 4 modules, so I can use this as a stop to bring down to Nauvis and our module production. Before I make the science build again, I decide to make another weird stop for multispectral mirrors. They're annoying to make and used in astro and energy science, so worth making a dedicated stop for. Also, it lets me put off making the science. Also, it makes quite a bit of scrap, so now we can watch the recycling facility in action. This is probably the only stop I actually care about throughput, hence the 12 inserters. We're making space science, utility science, and productivity science here, which takes a lot of different things, and that means a lot of different trains. However, I don't have everything I need on trains, and that's where the science rocket comes in. It's the only one of these 4 rockets that will be spared. I do need to redo the circuits, though. The rest of the science will go on belts and be put on guess what? A train. Whatever, it works. 3rd time's the charm, I guess. The main reason to set it up like this is to watch the pretty colors go by. Well, there it is. With everything up, we can finally get back to work on the Big Four. But I don't know, take another moment to soak it all in. Can you believe that I forgot to turn the ore into plates before putting them on the recycling trains? And then there is a coronal mass ejection on Hoth here. Weaker than our power grid though, so hardly worth mentioning. Up until now, I've been pretty casual about where I've put the builds, but for the science, I'd like them to follow some semblance of structure. For this, I'm going to reserve this central area, then put the science next to it. The first of the 4 sciences I'll make is going to be Astronomical Science. All the science paths are very similar, but they each have their own quirks. Astronomical Science uses a ton of thermofluid. Luckily, we can make the process more efficient by adding cryonite slush. It lets us get more cold fluid without creating as much hot fluid. Not only does it mean more cold fluid, but it also means less radiators since we're not creating as much waste hot fluid. So you know what I thought would be a really cool idea? Making all the sciences without logistics bots. What could go wrong? Anyway, we'll run all the thermofluids this way with the help of these super long pipes, and then plug it into the telescopes to make observation frames, just like last time. Except we only made 3 of the 7 observation frames last time, since we only got up to Tier 1 astroscience. The other kinds of observation frames are made in these other facilities, and yes, they are reskinned transmitters and receivers. Or maybe it's the other way around. Regardless, the point is, I can only make Tier 1 astroscience, but I'm designing this whole thing for all 4 tiers from the start, even though I don't have all the buildings yet. I'm able to do this because of my massive brain, but mostly the power of the recipe book mod. Once we've got all the observation frames, we turn them into observation data. We'll also need astronomical data, but as we get more research, we'll actually unlock more efficient astronomical data that takes all 7 observation datas at once, so we'll build for that. Here's where the blank data cards come in, and here is when this build gets a little messy. Since we need to handle scrap and junk data cards with belts, there's a lot of funny belts required. Also, we'll be reformatting and scrapping the data cards on site before cycling them back in. But I probably should have shoved them on a train to a dedicated reformatting area and saved myself this belt nightmare. Oh well, you know, hindsight 2020, whatever. That leaves all the other data cards. I don't even know how much I want to explain these. They're complicated, but not really in an interesting way, and I'm building for data cards I haven't even unlocked yet, so it'll just look like a giant mess. I guess past Tier 1, they all pretty much take astronomic data in some form, as well as other data cards that took astronomic data. Then there's this one that takes particle streams, but the worst are the recipes that output cool thermofluid instead of hot. It's all a bit convoluted, and I don't want to be here all day, so, I don't know, pause and try and decipher it with your eyes. God knows I've already forgotten half of it. But at the end of it all, we should have a grand total of 16 data cards. And this area at the top is where we will turn them all into catalogs and load them onto a train. Of course, after we unlock the other catalogs. Well, after all that, we've got something that can theoretically make Tier 4 Astro catalogs, but the science is another matter. And that is what we need to make next, and that is also why I've reserved this central area. First, we'll need some thermofluid, and fortunately I can just copy the build from Astro. All the catalogs from all the sciences will converge here as well as the other ingredients, and that's because, if you'll recall, we need to combine all the insights from all the different catalogs to make the most efficient significant data, plus all the other catalogs to make the most efficient insight, and all 3 to make the science, so bringing the catalogs here is the cleanest way to do it. I will say, building it all at once is probably a little confusing, but keep in mind that even though we only have 1, this is designed ahead of time for all 4 sciences. This significant data design won't even work until I've got more than Astro available. To actually make the science, we need tons of different items. This especially gets awkward when we're not using logistics bots. Just for the astroscience, we'll need to bring in beryllium plates, rods, aeroframes, and bulkheads. Then another 4 unique items for all the other sciences. Thankfully, we have trains. This is what our double-headed train station design was all made for, the ability to make this belt-only build without wanting to rip my hair out. If my calculations are correct, I should be able to fit 8 stations here. And so it does. And so does the other side. I love it when a plan comes together. I am genuinely astonished that I was able to get it to look this good. We can only make 2 out of the 4 beryllium products, but expect that to change soon. Hopefully it's a little more understandable when I've got the fluids going through it. Now we actually gotta get this science to a lab. There are 28 different kinds of science in this mod, and getting them all on belts is non-trivial. But this is where we want to drop off the sciences from the other science zone. At first I considered putting all of the sciences into a warehouse and doling them out to the labs that way, but that's still 14 separate belts. So what the heck, it's sushi belt time. In the ongoing theme of form over function, it's got throughput issues, but at least it looks cool. Or at least it will when there's science in it. If you want to know more about how this thing works, I'm not going to explain it, and you're just going to need to live with that. Sorry. But who cares about seeing crappy old science on it? We want to see new science. Well, the moment that catalog train shows up, we'll get our science. We've only got 2 out of the 4 catalogs, but it's just a matter of time. Yeah, again, we can't actually make significant data here, but we'll be able to later. But to tide us over, we can take this chest full of it from the old base, as well as some of the science packs we've already stored up. And there they are on the carousel. Now we can research these aeroframe scaffolds, which we will need for the 3rd tier. But before that, I gotta deal with all these junk data cards. The science production makes a lot. Everything in space is set up to make Tier 3 and 4 astroscience, but we still need to finish the buildings down here. The aeroframe scaffolding is pretty straightforward, though. I don't have them researched yet, but while I'm here I might as well set up the bulkheads too. Then it all goes on the train. I really planned ahead with all this stuff. Now that I've unlocked Tier 3 Astro, I can finally get rid of those placeholders and make all 7 kinds of observation frames. Very colorful. Unfortunately, the belts aren't arranged correctly to make a rainbow. But that gets us Tier 3 catalogs. The main thing this will let us research is this. After this, we'll be able to make our own spaceships. Conquering the whole solar system is now in reach. It'll also help us get Tier 4 of the astroscience, cause we need a data card that can only come from asteroid belts. But it's been about another 100 hours, plus another 40 to edit the video altogether, so I'm gonna call it here. I hate to say it, but rest assured, the 3rd part will be the last one. But let's build us a spaceship. Or rather, just make the one we've already got fatter. These parts are expensive, okay? The main difference is, now that we have rocket engines, we can actually land on Nauvis. With everything set up, I don't think it'll be long at all before we finish the other Tier 4 sciences. And if you're interested in seeing that happen, eventually, consider subscribing. This is also the part where I heap effulgent praise upon all of my patrons, who love watching me ramble around in Factorio so much they actually pay for it. That's crazy. Anyway, we're past the midpoint of space exploration and the end is in sight. Look forward to the next episode where we actually explore space. But until then, see you later.